Welcome to the webinar. Hello. What the 2026 federal budget means for government contractors. My name is Alexa Tsui, the CEO of Forum, and I was having problems with my video button, but we got there. Today's event is scheduled from 11 to 12 and it will be recorded. Yes, the recording will be distributed as well as the slides. So I know that's a question we're going to get at least 15 more times before the end of this. Put it out there. We are going to be distributing this right after it renders and we get everything kind of compiled. Just a few things to keep everything running smoothly. If you experience any technical issues or have any questions during the program, please reach out to Marianne Brown in the chat. She'll be happy to assist you. We want today's event to be interactive. If you think of any questions, please type them into the Q&A box or into the chat. We will be monitoring both, and I'll be interactively asking Tris questions at the same time that he's talking. We sort of agreed on this chaos in advance. Or if we get most of the questions towards the end, we'll just hold it for a regular Q&A. We'll kind of see what happens. Also, would love to have you all introduce yourselves in the chat. Make sure that you select in the chat instead of just talking to us, you talk to everybody. That's something that Zoom has made a little confusing. Thanks, Zoom. And with that, I'm going to pop over and introduce our wonderful speaker for today, Tris Carpenter, somebody that I've admired in the industry for many years. He's the general manager of strategic growth at Red Team Consulting, a senior executive with over 30 years of strategic portfolio leadership and advisory consulting experience, bringing demonstrated success in shaping and winning new business across major government agencies and diverse commercial markets. His proven strategic perspective in defining, managing, and delivering transformation initiatives for small business and mid-tier firms has established him as a well-known leader in the federal government contracting industry. Also, if you don't follow him on LinkedIn, he's one of the best on LinkedIn in our industry. With that, I will hand it over to Tris. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Alexa. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and get started. So bear with me while I go into full screen mode. All right. Hopefully everyone can see the slide set displayed properly, can hear me well. But thank you again, Alexa, and good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate everyone taking an hour out of their day. I know there's a lot of noise in the market right now between the rolling appropriations, the reconciliation bill, and of course, everything surrounding DOGE. So really the goal today is pretty simple. We're going to try and cut through that noise, kind of try to ground you in the actual enacted numbers, and try to give you a practical framework for translating budget intelligence into really kind of beady action. So here's our roadmap really for the next 55 minutes or so. We'll start with kind of the big picture budget landscape and talk about how we got here. Then we'll do an agency by agency breakdown, kind of covering both, defense and civilian, and look at some of the winners and some of the losers in the FY26 budget battle. We'll also address and talk a little bit about, of course, the government mandated efficiency initiative, or otherwise known as DOGE, because the reality there is kind of different than what you see in the headlines. Then we'll walk through the growth markets and small business dynamics, some of the procurement policy changes that affect how you could compete, and then kind of close with some strategic positioning and some thoughts on potential action steps. So as Alexa mentioned, she'll moderate the questions and as we go, but then we'll also leave a little bit of time at the end. But please feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat or the Q&A as we go. So the more specific the questions, the better we can kind of address it. So definitely don't be shy about asking about an agency or a specific market segment. So when we talk about FY26 budget snapshot, let's kind of start where things stand now. So if you've been waiting for the dust to settle on FY26 funding, the good news is that we're pretty much there. We now have mostly complete clarity on things like spending levels, and that clarity, can be a planning advantage. So as of February 3rd, as you all probably were monitoring, 11 of the 12 full year appropriation bills have now been enacted. So that's a welcome change from last year, where we basically were on a full year continuing resolution. So we do have a final enacted budget for 11 of the 12 full year appropriation bills. Um, so OMB issued a memo on February 4th, right after that, directing agencies to kind of resume normal operations. Of course, the sole exception is the Department of Homeland Security, which of course has been in a partial shutdown since, Valentine's Day, February 14th. Um, and that happened after the 2 week CR expired without a deal. So we'll come back to that and what that means potentially for DHS contractors specifically. So let me go ahead and walk through some of the numbers. So total FY 2026 enacted discretionary spending is about, 1.65 trillion, which is roughly about 10 billion above where we were last year for FY 25. But that discretionary budget doesn't tell the full story. Um, One of the real drivers is the 382 billion in mandatory reconciliation funding that occurred through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So that breaks down to around 153 billion for armed services, 133 billion for DHS border security, 39 billion through the Homeland Security Government Advisory Committee for immigration enforcement, and about 50 billion plus across, several other accounts. So when you add it up, really the effective FY 26 spending authority is really approaching about $2 trillion. So you can kind of see that visualized in the stack bar there on the left side of the slide. Um, Defense discretionary came in around 839 billion, which is actually about 8.4 billion above what the president had requested. So that's a pretty strong signal. Um, so, really Congress views defense as a clear priority, as you can kind of tell by these numbers. Also important is when the budget was enacted, these 11 of 12 bills, Congress really rejected some of the deeper proposed civilian cuts. For example, they restored the labor HHS education bill to about 195 billion in discretionary. So that was notably higher than what the president's budget request had. Um, there's also 12.5 billion in emergency funding, 2.65 billion for things like for wildfire suppression, not wildlife, 20 billion in disaster relief that's already been enacted. So, takeaway is these are real dollars kind of
Hey,
flowing
hey
now.
Tris, we're still seeing your main slide, your first slide, if you wanted to advance it a few.
Are you seeing them move forward?
No, I'm only seeing your front slide, what the 2026 budget means for your government contractors. You're going to want to advance it to the next slide or two or three.
Does
Advance.
that does that make a difference?
That's not showing your slides. Yeah.
Maybe stop your screen share and reshare. Make sure you're sharing full screen.
My apologies.
No, you're fine. We are sending the slides to everyone after this too, so everybody will be able to see.
Is that better?
There we go. Perfect. Yep. Now we can see it. Yep. I don't know if you
Okay.
wanted to just quickly go back over your first couple of the second slide real quick and then jump into your third slide because these are some of the best slides I've seen on the budget period. So
I see what happened. When I went to full screen mode, for some reason it paused my screen share. Let me start over then. Huh. Okay. One moment. Live TV, right?
mm,
Okay. I'm just going to stay in this view. All right. Okay. So Uh, First slide was really just the agenda, and been talking to this slide here, talking about, and everybody, we're on the same slide 3 right now, right? Yeah.
Yep, we're good. We're good.
Okay.
We're good, Tris.
Cool.
Yep, we got you.
So as you can see, several of the bullet points kind of cover what I was just talking about. Really getting into the breakdown, what we see in total FY26 enacted discretionary, the change versus FY25, what's been enacted for defense discretionary being above the president's request. Also, the mandatory recon funding through OBBBA, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and started to talk about kind of where we are with federal contract awards FY25 actual. So FY25 federal contract awards totaled about 834 billion, as you can see there. So, basically, if you're trying to size the opportunity, the enacted budget really kind of gives you a reliable baseline. So the takeaway here, pretty straightforward. Definitely it's important to track the enacted numbers, not what's requested. That's true for FY26. It's going to be true for FY27 as we head towards the next budget request in the next month or so. Um, because that president's budget request, it is a political document that kind of sets the policy direction. Really, the enacted appropriation is like the financial reality. So those enacted figures are really what generate the contract dollars, and kind of what folks should consider building their BD strategy around. So hopefully I've shifted to slide 4 here, but now, let me walk you through how we got here because, the path matters for understanding where agencies are in their execution cycles. So FY26 appropriation kind of moved in 3 waves with a brief shutdown, as we know. Wave 1 came on November 12th, covering agriculture, legislative branch, military construction, VA. Um, that bill also included a reduction in force prohibition that kind of retroactively voided the reductions in force. So that was something we'll talk a little bit about later. Um, Wave 2 kind of ran from November 25 through January this year. That focused on commerce, DOJ, energy, water, interior, environment. Net discretionary spending across those accounts was reduced about 4 billion versus FY25. Then we had a partial shutdown just a few days through February 3rd that impacted about half the federal departments. And then wave 3 really started on February 3rd, with covering DoD, labor, HHS, education, financial services, etc. DoD got a 2-week continuing resolution through the 13th of February, but then, of course, that expired without a deal. So DHS has really been in this partial shutdown since February 14th. So again, current status with 11 funded departments, apportionments kind of really have been largely cleared. But those program level releases, fund releases, are still kind of lagging at some of the agencies. So that matters if you're, waiting on task orders or option exercises, for example. DHS is kind of still grinding along. The House did pass a bill on the 5th, but the Senate Democrats have blocked that, kind of falling short of that, 60-vote threshold that's required. So we're continuing to move forward and shut down for DHS and in its 4th week. And as you can see, TSA, for example, employees are not getting their paycheck. So there's been churn, Secretary Noem has been replaced and Senator Mullen has been nominated to take over. So that, again, is pending Senate confirmation, but that could happen at the end of this month. at least in terms of when Secretary Noem is stepping down. Um, but that leadership transition, could open a path to compromise on funding. So we recommend, of course, watching this space closely. Again, the good news, we have that almost complete clarity on spending levels. Obviously, agencies got the funding in wave one, like VA, are already kind of months ahead in execution. The agencies in wave three are just kind of ramping up. So, recommend understanding where your target agencies fall kind of along this timeline to give you an indicator of how soon things may start moving. Um, so when we talk about the defense spending landscape for FY26, I mean, clearly defense is the dominant growth story of FY26, especially with everything that's going on currently. So, I'll attempt to kind of break it down. As I mentioned earlier, defense discretionary is about 839 billion. Plus, we had an armed services reconciliation at about 153 billion. So total about 992 billion, close to $1 trillion. Um, and there's already been talk of a $1.5 trillion budget next year, at least to be requested. But when you take a look at the chart, some of the growth priorities are clear. Research, development, test, and evaluation, or RDT&E, is at about 146 billion, so that's up 4 to 5% over FY25. Procurement, roughly 168 billion, so that's going to cover things like shipbuilding, munitions, and platforms. Big boost to shipbuilding, getting 27 billion. Um, and we listed some of those, some of the specific classes that are covered. O&M, now that is, even though it's up about 5% nominally, it's really still flat when you factor in inflation. So that's important. If you're in that O&M sustainment space, you might want to expect intensifying competition for the flat dollars. So, again, what we're really seeing is growth in RDT&E and in procurement areas. The armed service split roughly, you know, again, 31% for Air Force, 30% for Navy, about 20% for Army. And, with the enacted National Defense Authorization Act that happened at the end of the year, kind of reinforces really this trajectory with things like consumption-based procurement authority, so think software as a service, AI, ML security mandates, and also some structural acquisition reforms that kind of favor more non-traditional entrants. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So kind of a nuanced story for defense. Obviously, spending's up significantly, but growth is really concentrated in that RDT&E area and procurement and some specific mission areas. Again, O&M sustainment just got a little more competitive. So, if you're in technology, modernization, or platforms, is a really good indicator the money is there for that. So to kind of expand on that in terms of, some FY26 defense priority investments, um, really kind of drilling into 7 funded priority areas within defense. This is where we see a lot of the contract dollars concentrated. First, we've got space and missile defense at about 40 billion, showing some pretty rapid growth. Um, Proliferated space architecture, Golden Dome missile defense, satellite communications. Second, AI ML, at about 13.4 billion. So this is kind of the first consolidated AI budget that DoD has had. Funds things like AI sandboxes and national institutes, and really kind of focuses on a security first procurement posture. Um, and kind of comes with some teeth, right? So there's bans on things like DeepSeek and high flyer products and 30-day removal deadlines for certain things. So, if your tech stack kind of touches these model, really that removal window is kind of closed. So, um, thirdly, cybersecurity at about 15 billion, with mandatory enforcement. Of course, zero trust mandates are in effect. CMMC 2 is being enforced, and some of these harmonized requirements are going to be required by June of this year. Next, software and digital modernization. So this is kind of a structural shift, not really incremental. Um, there are really multiple named funded pilot programs for things, as we mentioned earlier, for things like consumption-based procurement and IT technical debt framework. Fifth, we have the naval shipbuilding area at about 27 billion. So that includes, as you can see there, submarines, destroyers, frigates, multi-year procurement authority, but with also an emphasis on automation in advanced shipbuilding. Next is really kind of industrial base and rapid acquisition. So over 650 million, I should say, focused on speed and scale. Rapid acquisition authority, DIU fielding, and also manufacturing surge capacity. And then finally, the final area there, the IC. So actually some good signs there, seeing sustained expansion with growth over FY25. That's being driven by things like classified systems and analytics demand. Um, but I want to emphasize this point. Um, these are not concepts or aspirational goals. These are really kind of enacted programs with deadlines, governance structures, and attached contract vehicles. So each one of these 7 areas really has real money behind it, and real procurement activity is either underway or it's coming soon. So definitely think about tracking these programs, because you may be leaving some opportunity on the table. So next we want to take a look at what's going on with civilian agencies and what are some bright spots. Because I know, a lot of folks on the call are probably focused in the civilian space. So, you're definitely going to be very interested in some of these numbers as well. Um, so really kind of despite all the attention on the defense side, there are some bright spots where enacted funding is creating some more near-term contract opportunity. So DHS, even with their budget struggles, is at about 107 billion in enacted FY26 funding, plus another 20 billion or so in disaster relief. So some of the focus areas there, of course, border, maritime security, mission IT, cybersecurity, surge facilities, and logistics. So again, even though they're in a partial shutdown and its discretionary bill hasn't officially passed, but the reconciliation money from OBBBA, about 172 billion, is already apportioned, and it's already kind of flowing. So I think I saw a stat that really effectively 80% of DHS is operational right now. It's really just certain parts that isn't. Um, so next, VA, looking strong. They got early enacted funding at over 163 billion. Several key areas in focus this year: health IT, community care, revitalized EHRM modernization, VA construction. Um, then, related military construction is at about, 17 to 18 billion. That includes things like base and family housing, 5G infrastructure, and facility upgrades. Um, Big opportunity area. I know, Alexa, you have thoughts here too, with DOT, FAA. We're seeing some movement there. Big focus, of course, on aviation modernization, including air traffic control, things like that. Also, other IT systems and new hires. The intelligence community, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, 115 billion. Do you, focus on classified programs, cyber operations, advanced analytics. Um, Pardon me,
Yeah,
budget.
so the one thing I was going to say is that DOT has a lot of senior leadership turnover and additions. So understanding Pavan, his role as the CIO, and then some of the folks that he's been hiring is really going to be instrumental in understanding kind of what their priorities are. I guess it's kind of Captain Obvious thing to say, but DOT and the FAA, I think, is probably one of the hottest markets of the entire government right now.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree. I just actually posted an RFI notice that came out, for FAA that's pretty interesting. So, folks, I can share my LinkedIn, but, definitely check out some recent RFI notices that have come out of DOT and FAA. Then kind of wrapping up, USA's, if you're a player in that space, over $10 billion for infrastructure and water resources. So, these agencies are kind of where some of this new money can translate into some near-term contract opportunities, as we're seeing, reinforced by NDAA authorization for program durability. So takeaway, I'd pay attention to Homeland and VA. Despite the shutdown, the recon dollars are flowing. They're generating rapid procurement activity, things like in areas like border technology and facilities. Um, Tracked spend plan clearances, not really just the headline appropriation headline. And VA again at 163 billion is kind of one of those more durable civilian markets in the federal space. Um, so things to keep an eye on there. Um, oops. But then we look at you really what agencies are under some pressure in FY26. Um, so 5 agencies were initially targeted for really significant cuts in the president's budget request. But as I mentioned earlier, Congress did restore funding in several of these areas. For example, HHS had a proposed cut of 31 billion. Congress did restore that. The enacted labor HHS education bill is about 195 billion in discretionary. Areas like health research, public health infrastructure, IT modernization, and telehealth expansion are funded areas. But the execution story is a little different. A lot of consolidation still planned, potentially to consolidate NIH institutes uh, down to 8 entities potentially. So that's still out there, a lot of churn. So that restructuring is kind of creating a lot of uncertainty, as I know folks who focus on HHS know well. But the top line does have some bright spots. State Department, we all know that story with USAID and Doge and everything that happened last year. Um, that had an 84% cut. Um, International aid down roughly 8.3 billion. Um, and USAID obviously is pretty severely curtailed there. HUD faced a proposed 44% cut. Did get some partial restoration there to about 8 billion. EPA similarly got restored to about 8 billion. Um, NSF was on the block, but was restored back to about 8.7 billion. It's below FY25, but it's still around, still operational. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of these efficiency things, but the good news, bad news, good news, still down, but not nearly as bad as it looked, when the budget request came out. So I would track the enacted numbers. Don't really pay as much attention to the PBR. Um, Congress has final say in terms of what makes it. Um, and really primary risk at these agencies is execution volatility with deferred retirements, reductions in force, people leaving. We're in an election year, midterms, so we might see more people leaving. Um, so continue to monitor that. So what does it mean practically? You can have a healthy top line, but again, it's monitor your programs, understand how programs are being restructured, how contracts may be delayed, and then how personnel turnover is kind of slowing procurement activity and things like that. So there is execution turbulence, obviously in FY26, kind of continuing forward from last year. I know a lot of us were just happy to get through last year, but can expect that there's still going to be fair amount of disruption this year, but we now have some guardrails and countermeasures potentially in place. So talking about Doge, a lot of confusion in the market. Talk to CEOs, BD leaders, and a lot of, the question comes up um, on, does Doge still exist and how has it changed the market? Um, so when you look at some of the data, you'll see on the left side that Doge claimed about 214 billion in savings and contracts, 10,000 contracts terminated, large workforce reductions. But when you look at kind of what's verified, what's being reported, it actually is a much different story, about 8.6 billion in direct savings. Really haven't seen any material reduction in FY26 federal spending top lines. Defense spending actually grew about 13% year over year. So those really created more execution disruption versus any kind of budget austerity. So that's important, you know, when Congress wanted efficiency cuts, they put them into the bill. So that's kind of what you're seeing reflected there. So really, it's kind of Congress setting these efficiency targets, not really Doge. Um, so, some of the impact areas, you know, obviously contractors experience contract terminations, um, you know, terminated recompetes, margin pressure, hiring slowdowns, things like that. Workforce saw a lot of RIF attempts and some reversals. We saw hiring freezes, and we saw a lot of churn and cleared talent. And procurement timing was clearly disrupted with delays up to 90 days, stalled option exercises, task order backlogs. Um, so, if you're a service firm waiting on an option year exercise or even a new task order, obviously you felt that firsthand. But here's an area that some people may not be as aware of. You know, this cumulative effect of 90-day procurement delays across hundreds of programs is pretty significant. I mean, it's obviously going to create a backlog effect where agencies are now trying to release a full quarter's worth of actions in a pretty compressed timeline. Um, so there is opportunity for firms that are positioned and ready to move. Um, I mentioned congressional countermeasures is a bright spot. So, these are real enacted stabilization actions. There was a reduction in force prohibition that was enacted. We now have some more transparency reporting that's been mandated under the NDAA, and also some bid protest deterrence under the NDAA as well, where there could be financial penalties for firms who protest unsuccessfully. Um, so again, foot stopping, it's really created a lot of turbulence, but not really any noticeable budget austerity type of measures. So, you know, that's that congressional check. That's permanent. These guardrails aren't really going away. And the Doge disruption hopefully has already been constrained and is really kind of more episodic at this point. So, you know, don't build your strategy around Doge, again, focus on the enacted numbers and what's been kind of put forward in the NDA and things like that, as they're going to be more durable type of signals. So that kind of leads us into, the overall kind of FY26 federal contracting landscape. Um, so let's kind of look at the overall contracting market before we kind of dive into some growth markets. Um, this dashboard hopefully gives you kind of a macro view of some of the things that are happening across the federal contracting ecosystem. So there's really kind of four headline metrics that we focused on for this dashboard. Total contract awards are actually above 830 billion and continuing to grow year over year. But the active vendor base across federal contracting has declined to about 105,000 contractors. Even per PDS data, close to 4,000 fewer firms won federal work from FY24 to 25. So that, of course, tells us, fewer firms are kind of winning larger shares. Small business share of that money, is about 24%, which meets the statutory goal. As we know, a lot of the non-statutory goaling from the previous administration was reversed. And defense share now exceeds 60% of awards, and that's up from about 55% in FY24, when you include reconciliation funds and things like that. So that's a pretty significant shift. When we look at the consolidation visual there, again, fewer firms winning more dollars. That's, of course, going to create more competitive tension, I guess, in FY26. And, in response, the NDAA, for example, does attempt to kind of counter some of this consolidation and reopen defense contracting to non-traditional in commercial firms. So you see that in maps, for example, where they're making a real push there. So again, some things like consumption-based procurement, non-traditional exemptions, commercial past performance now being accepted, cost accounting standards, exemptions, and thresholds have been eased quite a bit. So that should open up things too. And also facility clearance acceleration. So these all should be positive signals to increase the number of entrants and potential award pool for at least on the DoD side. So when we talk about some growth markets over the next 12 months or so, where is that funding durable, or is it authorized, and how does it translate into contracts? So we kind of laid out 9 areas here on the slide. Cybersecurity, really, 15 billion across DoD. CMMC 2.0 enforcement, which is really kicking in. Again, I mentioned zero trust, expedited ATOs. AI/ML, big area, of course, 13 billion roughly on the DoD side, plus about 8.4 billion federal wide. That's covering things like security frameworks, sandboxes, AI institutes, Space Force, approximately 40 billion. That's a 30%, over a 30% growth for things like Golden Dome and missile defense. Software modernization and FedRAMP, including ATO, processing, tech debt, remediation, consumption-based procurement, another key area. We talked about DHS with a 65% funding increase through those dual streams. We talked about VA, 163 billion for several of the areas I mentioned earlier. Milcon, NNSA, of course, very specialized area, but um, definitely a growth area. And then Army Corps of Engineers at approximately 10 billion for things like water resilience, and DOE, RPE, energy. So, these are authorized, these are funded, they're not proposals. These are actual enacted programs with contracting dollars attached. So you may want to think about when you build your pipeline, looking at some of these areas for positioning, because, it's what we're seeing, at least in the budget numbers, kind of in FY26 and headed into FY27. So just to kind of foot stomp some of these competition rules, we have seen some changes. Um, so I can walk you through kind of three categories here. First is at lower barriers to entry. Again, consumption-based procurement. So that's looking at, more productized as a service type of offerings that kind of encourages flexibility, reduces some large upfront commitments, non-traditional exemptions. So that's simplifying requirements for commercial firms and new entrants to enter, and really codifying commercial past performance now being accepted is another area. Second, we're seeing some reduced compliance friction. So I mentioned earlier some of the cost accounting standards um, loosening a little bit. So cost pricing data thresholds been raised to 10 million. Cost accounting system triggers raised to 35 million. So that's a big jump from what it previously was. So that's going to be important for small mid-tier businesses who were feeling that burden of cost accounting system compliance. And thirdly, we're seeing vehicle access consolidating, a series of executive orders really driving a shift towards GWACs and multiple award schedules. So we're seeing some agency-specific vehicles disappearing. Think PACs, think First Source, for example. So, if you have a contract access strategy built around agency-specific IDIQs, you might want to think about kind of reassessing that, because we are seeing some agencies retire their own vehicles in favor of some of these government-wide contracts. And we kind of see that accelerating. For example, GSA just awarded Alliant 3 Phase 1 awards to 43 vendors. We saw that. Got more phases coming there. Oasis Plus expanded to 13 service domains under Phase 2. We now have kind of continuous on-ramps now open, so that's all good news. But these are, live vehicles accepting task orders. So, you know, um, always think about positioning potentially, especially for some of these continuous on-ramp vehicles, et cetera. We talk about supply chain, so that's been in the news a lot lately. So just briefly kind of touching on this, Buy American is a requirement to maintain, 65% domestic content threshold through 2028, with some platform specific requirements around shipbuilding, Milcon, water infrastructure. Also, Chinese entity phase outs are expanding across IT hardware. Also, batteries, solar, biotech, et cetera. With compliance deadlines kind of between now and 2031. So supply chain compliance is now, a bid consideration, a clear bid consideration. Think about what your supply chain is, not just hardware, but software also, because if that compliance is questioned during evaluation, it might be too late. So compliance, obviously, more and more of a factor, kind of more of an award and evaluation consideration, but it also is kind of impacting and directly affects win probability and margin. So we mentioned some of the things earlier, DeepSeek, high flyer bands, um, also, you know, comprehensive AI ML security policy, and things like that, expedited ATO reviews. Um, we also see financial and protest risk. I mentioned some steps that have been taken to kind of control the volume of protest activity and things like that. So, and really agency specific guardrails is another kind of key area around areas like IT governance, contract cancellation, notifications of VA, USDA, for example, by American enforcement, and ongoing IG audit requirements. Um, so we also saw recently in the news related to this, right, with Anthropic and Claude. So March 5th, the Pentagon designated Anthropic as a supply chain risk. So now we're hearing defense contractors need to certify that no Anthropic products are used in DoD systems. Anthropic's obviously fighting back, filing suit. So this is all kind of in litigation currently. But if your AI stack uses Claude, uses Anthropic tools, you might want to keep an eye on this because it might affect your compliance posture, especially in the DoD space. So again, just kind of emphasizing if compliance is clearly an evaluation factor. It's definitely something to keep an eye on and potentially understand investment requirements. Um, 5 years ago, compliance was something you did after the win. Today, it's kind of how you win. So the evaluators are looking at things like CMMC readiness, AI governance, supply chain, so these are becoming real discriminators now. Um, Touching briefly on some small biz market dynamics in terms of the FY26 budget. Um, you know, I know a lot of folks in this audience are with small business firms, and, you know, what are some of the, specific thoughts in this space? Um, and really, this is one of the most interesting parts of the FY26 landscape. So I mentioned earlier, small business share is stable around 24%. That's about 194 billion plus in awards. But again, that's kind of the largest absolute small business volume ever. But we are seeing some of the mix shifting. We're seeing SDB, small disadvantage goals, kind of declining. Um, Also, we're seeing some of the GSA schedule set aside structures are evolving. So a real opportunity for small businesses is on the DoD side. We're seeing that again opening up more structurally through the NDAA provisions. Um, a lot of things that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Um, but another important development to note, I'm sure you all have been following the 8A program and the SBA audit. SBA did terminate another 800 firms in early March for financial noncompliance. So if you're an 8A, definitely want to make sure that you've sent in all your paperwork and you have your verified status. Also, if you're teaming with 8A partners, confirming that they're eligible as well. Is a big focus on that area. And we listed some, bright spots for small business in terms of upcoming opportunities and things like that. So it's shifting, but definitely is worth ensuring you understand where some of this SDB action is going and what it could mean for you and your partners. So as we look at kind of taking this intelligence and kind of leading into really BD execution, what are some areas and some thoughts to think about? It's a really four-step framework here to consider. Important to assess your exposure, map your contracts against growth versus contracting agencies, um, quantifying revenue concentration, flagging potential vehicle consolidation risk, also aligning to growth markets. So potentially looking to prioritize AI, cyberspace, cloud, et cetera, closing capability gaps and looking at teaming with potentially non-traditional firms, um, securing a competitive position. So ensuring that you've got a good hold of CMMC if it applies, um, looking at GWAC and MAS access lanes because those are stronger than ever, advancing capture on recompetes, and of course, auditing potential supply chain exposure. And then finally, we feel it's important to monitor some of the key variables. Obviously, if you're involved and engaged with Homeland, monitoring discretionary status and in the Mullen confirmation timeline, for example, monitoring OMB spend plan approvals. So, you have enacted money, it gets apportioned, and then there's a spend plan that has to be approved at the program level. So that can be really great visibility and understanding how real the dollars are and when they may be available. Um, and of course, we've got an FY27 budget request on the horizon. So um, potentially $1.5 trillion defense budget and things like that. So it was already due in February. Of course, it'll be late, but probably in the April timeline, we might actually start to see where things are looking for next year. So these are really more for reference. I think these slides will be available. Really just more of a heat map, just summarizing a lot of what we just talked about in terms of things like agency by agency momentum, competition, BD focus areas, and things like that. So really these next two slides can kind of be summarization, dashboard type of thing for you all to reference as you move forward. So as we kind of wrap the presentation element, definitely want to leave, some time for questions here. Um, I guess the bottom line, competitive landscape really has shifted. And we're seeing really four main forces kind of in play here. So consolidation, we are seeing that accelerating. We're seeing fewer firms winning larger shares. We have vehicle consolidation, continuing to see some terminations, kind of compressing the active vendor base. So really, we feel scale and positioning really matters more than ever. Also seeing cleared talent bottlenecks with a lot of the churn last year heading into this year. We also have demand for cyber and AI type of skill sets. So that cleared labor shortage is intensifying. So we recommend planning workforce needs if you can, 12 to 18 months ahead, because talent is a gating factor for growth in some of these higher value markets. Compliance is now a gatekeeper. CMMC is in effect. It's mandatory in a lot of areas. AI and cyber mandates are prescriptive. False Claims Act enforcement is rising. So again, that compliance posture really has a direct effect potentially on win probability. And then finally, there's some structural openings, as we talked about with the new um, uh, availability potentially to non-traditional players and commercial firms. So we're seeing some of those entry barriers lower. So really just to wrap up here, 6 steps to kind of think about that you may want to execute in the near term, you know. So really more of um, a checklist to walk away with. So recommend assessing your exposure, mapping your contracts and pipeline to growth, and contracting agencies, um, then flagging potentially things that might be above a certain percent of concentration in a red zone agency. Um, CMMC, confirm certification timelines. We have phase 2 coming up at the end of the year. Um, Protecting your vehicle access, confirming your positioning, also planning potential agency IDIQ consolidation under, some of the executive orders that have come out. Important to prioritize capture now, start to advance your capture activities on FY26 and FY27 recompetes. So that includes starting some teaming conversation. There's early, especially with some of these non-traditional partners potentially. Um, Very important to engage contracting officers. If you have stalled options, mods, task orders, don't wait for them to reach out to you. Get in front of them, talk to them, see what's going on. Because a lot of the delays we're seeing are not policy driven right now; they're more process driven. So
Hey,
with some of
Tris,
these
I'm sorry to interrupt
conversations
you.
about,
We have a question.
oh,
Um,
sure.
yep, it's from Tanea, my friend Tanea Parker. Hey, girl. You mentioned that fewer companies are winning more. Can you talk about what characteristics of those winning firms are, or what is really helping them win more than any other kind of company? And apologies, I just saw this question right now.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, great question. I mean, we're seeing the shift, and I'm sure many are aware of it, but really shift towards outcome-based contracting that is, or contract awards basically, that really stress differentiation and proving outcomes to address agency challenges and things like that. So we're advising companies, if you've got a specialty or niche, go deep on that. Don't try and be everything to everybody or try to go after multiple agencies with broader offerings. What we're seeing, these firms that are being more successful, um, focus on a specific agency or sub-agency, et cetera, with a specific service solution product and clearly articulate differentiated value in their proposal. Um, and that's where we're seeing a lot of firms being more successful.
You could almost say like repackaging your services offerings into actual solutions, probably, right, too?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely a push towards pure services, moving towards componentized
Yep,
solutions and products. Yeah.
absolutely. Perfect. One more question. What about the Department of Treasury? Is it growing or shrinking this fiscal year? I think they mean 26, but if you have any hints towards 27 would be great too.
Yeah, Treasury is one of those areas kind of up and down, right? So IRS obviously was projected to be pretty severely impacted with reduced hiring and those types of things. However, we are seeing the IT side, system modernization pushing forward, and a lot of the cuts that were requested were not enforced in what was enacted. So I think it's kind of depends on what part of Treasury you're looking at, but I think areas like IRS have some bright spots, especially on the IT services side.
Okay, perfect. Well, we got 1 minute, so if you have one last piece of advice to offer folks, that would now would be the time.
Yeah, I think the good news is that we have money, we have an enacted budget. We are seeing the programs lurch forward. We're seeing some of the backlog get cleared. Um, I think a lot of what was holding up last year, of course, was the uncertainty of just not knowing what was happening next. I think we have a little more certainty. I mean, it's always a dynamic environment for sure, as you all know, but there's a little more consistency, a little more new normal setting in. So again, I think focus on the numbers, like understanding what's the enacted money, how's it apportioned, what's the spend plan for the agency you're looking at, and then responding to that with, differentiated value driven solutions that you know could bode well. And we'll see what happens with FY27. Probably have a follow-up webinar for that.
Yep, we'll have a follow-up webinar for the FY27 budget. Tris and I'll do it together, and maybe I'll even throw in some go-to-market stuff. Really appreciate everybody for attending. Thank you so much, Tris. As usual, it's been such a pleasure having you on.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity and good luck to everyone and happy remaining FY26.
Appreciate you.